You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Hello again, this is Annie Rose Malamet, and this is Girls, Guts, and Giallo, and I've got a very special guest today. I'm a big fan of her. She's also my friend, and I'm here with Kat Ellinger, and I think a lot of you probably already know who Kat is, but I'm going to ask her to introduce herself. Hi, Kat.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. I hate introducing myself. I'm British. We don't do that. I'm Kat Ellinger, Eurocult purveyor of filth and sleaze and lots of Gothic talk of places.
Yes, Kat is a prolific sleaze hound. She's like often referenced in a lot of things I read. I'm like, that's my friend. And I see the quotes dropped. You might have seen her in the folk horror documentary by Kayla Janice. She's been everywhere. She had a podcast called Daughters of Darkness. I know a lot of you are fans of. I was a big fan of when it was going. And yeah, I'm just really excited to finally get you on here. I know it's really hard because you're all the way across the world from me. So,
the magic of the internet, though,
yeah.
the magic.
Yeah. So I've been trying to get Kat on for a minute. I still want to do that episode about Last Tango in Paris with you.
Yeah.
And today we're talking about a collection of Giallo films. We're talking more specifically about Gothic Gialli. So a little different from what I normally do. Usually we pick like one film and we go into a deep dive, but today we're going to be talking about a collection of films and kind of their themes and what we like about them. And I have had just the absolute worst week, so I just don't have as thorough notes as I normally do. So it's going to be a very free-flowing conversation about these films. We're watching a lot of these on my Patreon this month and talking about them. And Kat is the Gothic expert, so I had to get her on to talk about these movies.
Take all these compliments. I do talk a lot about Gothic in the Giallo, though, so this is perfect. I think because there's always this people try and separate Gothic from the Giallo, but the Giallo started off as very Gothic, and those tend to be the ones that I talk about a lot. Lenzie, So Sweet, So Perverse. All the ones with Carol Baker were just upgrades of Gothic melodrama from the 40s. And a lot of the actual Gothic theme ones have Ernesto Gastaldi, the writer, in common. And he was influenced by, I often see everyone say, oh yeah, he was influenced by Diabolique, and he was. But the other main film he was influenced by was 1960s Midnight Lace with Doris Day, which was an attempt by producer Ross Hunter over at Universal International to bring back the 40s woman's picture, just upgraded. So Doris Day in that is like a woman in peril. She gets strange phone calls. She lives in London with a diplomat and she's terrorized. And there's so many shots in that of her on the phone that are then replicated in the Giallo that, pronto, that was on the phone. And Carol Baker even looks a bit like Doris Day in some of the Carol Baker, Lenzie Gialli. But it's only really been recently, I think because of the Severin set and a few other things that came out, that people are actually starting to take those films seriously, because people are going to start to think I hate Argento. And I don't. I fucking love Argento, but I feel like I have to point it out There's Argento came along in 70 with a bird with a crystal plumage with his own type of giallo, which really followed on from Bava. And it was very masculine, and it was more like the noir. It was all about the persecuted male and the amateur detective and that whole Hitchcockian wrong man trope, you know. So it was very masculine. And all the giallo before that, or most of them outside of, I guess, Blood and Black Lace, were very female-centric, and they were very based on the Gothic. They were inheritance plots. They were these Anne Radcliffean Scooby-Doo endings of explained supernatural and twisty-turny plots with no black glove killer, just someone trying to poison someone or gaslight someone. And, you know, mainstream fandom, they got written off as they're boring. They're not even giallo. The giallo is the black glove killer. No, it's not. No, it's fucking not. And it never was. You know, that's just a type of giallo. And there are lots of other giallos. So, like, Gothic is so in the giallo. And then the ones I like that follow on from that, So Strange Vice and Mrs. Ward, All the Colours of the Dark, Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, The House with Laughing Windows, Perfume of the Lady in Black. They're all the Gothic female-centric giallo ones. Because I love the fucking Gothic, and I love the Argento ones as well, but they're more about, I guess, crime procedurals and stuff. That's not all Argento is, obviously. There's a lot of interesting stuff about sexuality and gender in his films, but you know, they're much more like the noir and that very masculine thing. And I'm just so over people trying to separate them or saying that's not actually a giallo. Yes, it is. I take a very broad stance on what a giallo is.
I love
I have
that.
to say,
I
take a very wide view of what a giallo actually is. To my Italian teacher, all these years writing about Italian film, and I've only just started to learn. Well, I've been learning about 8 months and I'm shit at it, so don't ask me to speak any. But to my Italian teacher, a giallo is just a thriller or mystery. She calls like Midsummer Murders a giallo. Like she calls Miss Marple or Poirot or something a giallo. So she finds our fascination with this, like trying to define the giallo, really insane. Like she's just like, what is that?
It's a really annoying like film bro thing, I feel
it's
like.
Totally a film bro thing.
Yeah.
It is. They've got to put little lines around everything and say, you know, this is I just wrote an article for Scream, actually, not shitting myself, but a 3-part article.
Please
all the
show
colours
yourself.
of the giallo. And in that last part, I did actually write Suspiria is a giallo. I mean, I don't really care whether it is or not. I just I thought it's going to trigger enough for the bros to
it's worth it.
But my friend Justin Kurzweil, who you might know from the Hysteria Continues, the long-running slasher podcast, so he pointed out to me, Susie Banyan is the person in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's the bird with the crystal plumage, just with witch decor. It's the same fucking film.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this need to sort of like parse out what is giallo, what isn't. Somebody in my stream was asking me last night, we were watching The Red Queen strike 7 times, and someone asked, is the Eyes of Laura Mars a giallo? And, you know, a bunch of people were like, no, because it's American. And I was like, it's an American giallo, you know? I did a video thing for the Blu-ray release of that saying exactly that. It is totally influenced by the giallo. And I think the giallo can occur, or mainly it's Italian, but you can have a Spanish giallo. John Carpenter was influenced by Italian film. Laura Mars is influenced by that. There's a few American films around that time who were obviously influenced by the giallo. Why can't they be giallo too? Right.
Like you said, it's a bro thing because they want to lock it down and then say, you know, these are mine. You know, this is my area. And it's like, you know, if you feel like it's a giallo, it's a fucking giallo. That's my rule of thumb.
Yes, I love that. I mean, and that's why the name Giallo is in this podcast. And it's not because I only talk about Giallo, but pretty much everything I talk about is either a proto, an actual Giallo, or just incredibly influenced by it.
Yeah.
So that's why it's like a foundation.
I watched Identikit again recently, which is coming out by Severin. I can't wait to see that restored. And I was watching that thinking, this is a fucking Giallo. This is a Giallo. Identikit is a Giallo, which the first time I watched it, I was just like, oh my God, this film with Elizabeth Taylor in that mad dress, just being rude to people was everything. I wasn't even thinking. But then I went back and watched it and thought, hell, this is a Giallo. Why is this not in any Giallo books? It's totally a Giallo. It's a mystery about a dead woman.
I just got the House of Psychotic Women box set that has Identikit in it. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I can't
that.
wait to see it restored because I only saw it before on YouTube. I only found it a few years ago, and a friend of mine had found it on YouTube in a really degraded copy. But they were like, "You've got to see this crazy film with Elizabeth Taylor in it. This Italian film." I'm like, "What?" I think it was called. Is it Driving Seat? Is the alternative title? I saw it as that. And then I went back again and watched it again recently. Hopefully my set should be here soon because I can't wait to see it restored.
Yeah.
Because, oh my God, the colours and everything, which you couldn't really see in there. But it's totally a Giallo, and it's totally about female madness and all that stuff. But why does nobody write about it as a Giallo? It's been completely absent. Outside of Kayla, I think Kayla's the only person I've ever seen write about it.
Right. No, yeah, totally. She's totally responsible for bringing that film back into the conversation. This is something I've talked about a million times on this podcast, but Kat, what is like the traditional definition of Giallo? Because we're talking about Gothic, and a lot of people wouldn't necessarily put these films in that category, like we're saying, because of the supernatural element, right?
Yeah, I mean the actual definition of Giallo is still quite broad. Is quite open to interpretation, I think, because basically Giallo just followed on from the Mondadori pulp novels, which were like Agatha Christie and Edgar Wallace. They were like very traditional mysteries. But it was more to do with the covers, which were those pulp covers, which then became the Giallo. If you look at Bava's Blood and Black Lace, it's like a pulp cover come to life. It's more concerned with aesthetics, with fashion, with music, rather than being like an Agatha Christie sort of blow by blow, very, very sort of well thought out crime plot. They were never that. And I think within that, you can include also mystery as well. It's such a broad thing. But then if you look at the first mystery writer, Edgar Allan Poe was also one of the biggest Gothic writers. And I've always thought there's not that much separation between the two. Even though people are like, no, that's a mystery and that's a Gothic. There's not actually that much separation when you look at the mechanics.
There's mystery in the Gothics, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Most of those early Gothics were mystery novels. They were romances or mystery. Even like Jane Eyre is a mystery. You know, this woman comes out of the orphanage and is attracted to this guy she works for, but he's so mysterious and he's got all these secrets, and you know, it's all that thing about mystery. And so Gothic romance was all about that, or Gothic mystery in those early stories. And then we get to the actual mystery, the crime mystery. There's not that much of a separation. So, like, for me, I do just interpret if it's got mystery or thriller in it and it's kind of that aesthetic, then to me it's a Giallo. And I have heard people just give very rigid definitions like this is absolutely it. But it's like folk horror. You know, the folk horror, noir and the Giallo are like the three most debated, I think. And if you look at the folk horror documentary, 3 hours, nobody can actually really tell you what folk horror is. I think the great thing about that documentary is it shows you that it means something entirely different to almost every single person in there. So by the end, you're still like, what is it? Well, it's all of these things, and maybe none of them.
I know that pissed people off too. That it was like so.
Oh yes,
broad.
there was some bros on Twitter saying, "No, this is absolutely what a folk horror is this," and it's like, okay, whatever. You just discount all the other films and don't watch them then, whatever.
Yeah, just the obsession with labels. So you were talking a little bit about how the Gothic Giallo is very influenced by the woman's picture.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about the women's picture and film noir and the relationship
Yeah.
between
See,
those?
I fucking love the woman's picture, even though,
Me
a lot
too.
of them are seen as like, oh, they're just misogynistic and they just, no, those films are wild. They were absolutely. I saw that wonderful clip of you calling Mrs. Danvers a service bottom on Twitter. This is what I mean. They're on the surface, some of them might have been quite conservative, but they were absolutely brimming with all sorts of perversity and,
Oh yeah,
but
repressed women, like,
yeah.
on the verge of orgasm that's never fulfilled.
Take something like The Innocents, which isn't really a Hollywood, but from that same sort of era, a little bit later on. And you got Deborah Carr in that. He looks like she's about to fucking pop because she hasn't come in years.
Exactly.
It's a ghost story.
Yes.
There's a scene in that I always remember with this pendulum go, and it's so phallic and it's so. But the war came along, World War II came along, and Hollywood were partly making a lot of war hero films and saying, we're doing our bit for the war, we're just making these man films. And then they realised there weren't actually many men to watch them, and they were like, oh shit, we better make some women's films because it's all women. And what you got was this cycle that lasted about 10 years, which was incredible, where they did Wuthering Heights and Bluebeard and Rebecca. And Rebecca and Wuthering Heights were really the first two to come along. But it just became this vast cycle of just Gothic melodrama, Gothic mystery, Gothic romance. All of them are incredible. The costumes are incredible. The settings they're so perverse. And some of that then crossed over into the noir. So you had like the Gothic noir. And then it's like, is it Gothic or is it a noir? And I think any dark genres, they just mesh together because they're all looking at the same things. All of them are looking at the same things.
Neurosis, psychosexual tension.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that. I'm also thinking of that movie because a lot of the women we're talking about in these films are like crazy and evil or just otherwise neurotic. I'm thinking of that movie Sign of the Ram from 1948. Did you ever see that one?
My God, yes, I have, but I can't remember anything about it.
It's about a woman. It's about a woman in a wheelchair who is just manipulating everyone around her. It's really incredible.
Have I seen that? No, I don't think I have seen that.
Oh, you got to see it. You'll love it.
I've got it written down somewhere to watch, but I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. It's so like there was just so many crazy films made around that time. You had like old Joan Fontaine, her and her sister, old de Havilland, they were like the queens of that. And Joan Fontaine, she could either be like totally neurotic or like a cold, hard killer. And Olivia de Havilland was even better at that. My cousin Rachel was just amazing because it's like, did she kill this guy or
I love
didn't
that
she
movie.
kill this guy?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just like... and old Richard Burton is just like, well, I don't know, but I still want to fuck her, so I'm just gonna go along with it.
I mean, I think this kind of gets at the core of one of my questions for you, which is how are these Gothic Gialli different from other Giallo films? And I feel like what we're kind of zeroing in on here is the focus on women.
Yeah, they're totally female-centric, whereas actually a friend of mine, Michael Mackenzie, he produces a lot of Giallo stuff for Arrow and has contributed to stuff. He actually did his thesis on Giallo years ago, and I can't remember the name of the thesis, but I always quote it. So he came up with these two distinctions of M Giallo and F Giallo, male Giallo and female Giallo. And the female Giallo he didn't make the link with Gothic melodrama, but he outlined that they are two separate things. And then you get filmmakers like Sergio Martino tried to mesh the two things. So he tried to mesh the violence of the M Giallo with all the neurosis of the F Giallo. and he made like a hybrid thing. But his original films before, they were producing the Lenzi ones. That's what him and Luciano wanted to make. They wanted to find the next Carol Baker, and they did, Edwidge. So it is really more about the feminine, the Gothic feminine, or the female Gothic within the Giallo, which again, film bros will tell you that has no place yet there. And then it gets even more confusing, because then Kim Newman said years ago, he called supernatural Giallo fantastico. So he even said, right, this is a whole thing. But they kind of ignore that. They kind of ignore that and say, no, it can't be a Giallo if it's supernatural. Well, yeah, it kind of can, because they are still mystery. They're still in that thing. And again, usually female-centric, those ones. If you look at the Martino ones and that. But a lot of that, I think, was down to Ernesto Gastaldi, who I don't think anyone's ever asked him about this, but he is the writer. He started in Italian Gothic, and he's still around. He's in his 80s now. Started in Italian Gothic, and he started out writing pictures like The Whip in the Body, and he worked with Renato Polselli. And if you examine his work, he was hugely prolific. He wrote action films, he wrote everything. But his standout signature scripts are around the Gothic and the Giallo. And all of them almost exclusively seem concerned with S&M, female characters, and S&M also as a sort of sense of power. A female neurosis, very, very feminine. So he wrote things like Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion. And I think he wrote The Sweet Body is Deborah. He wrote So Sweet, So Perverse. He wrote The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. And you can see it's almost like Ernesto Gastaldi was single-handedly making this whole feminine Gothic thing within the Giallo. I find him fascinating, but no one ever asks him about that. Like, why? Why women? He did his own sort of Giallo in the 60s called Libido as well, which is a weird film. That is a weird film. Not female centric though. Yeah, he and his wife's in that, because he had this thing that if he ever made a film, his wife would be in it, and he loved her until she died. He's always writes about her on Facebook, so maybe it was that. Maybe he just worshipped his wife so much that I don't know. He knew how to write women.
Yeah, a lot of these Gothic Gialli, like Your Vice is a Locked Room, like you were talking about. I mean, that one is like a hybrid of like The Black Cat, but also Jane Eyre with the crazy woman in the attic. But there are also a lot of focus on women, but also queerness. Like I'm thinking of Hatchet for the Honeymoon, where the main character in that is a man, but there's like a queering element to his psychosis. So, you know, in traditional Gothic literature, I mean, pioneered by queers, right? So there's all of this very like gender fuckery, neurosis about gender roles, and especially in these Gothic Gialli, you know, because there was so much anxiety about gender roles in Italy at the time. So it's kind of ripe for Gothicism.
And I think people like Gastaldi really got it. They really got it. He really understood the Gothic, and I'd like to know what he'd read and that. You know, I think people discount them as, oh no, people don't think that deeply about this stuff, but as if these people weren't, you know, really invested in what they did or didn't consider themselves creative, even though they were making low budget films. Bava, certainly. Argento, so much queer stuff in Argento that rarely anyone ever talks about.
Oh yeah,
so much playing with gender overall.
Yeah,
like how many Giallo, without giving away spoilers, but do they sort of signpost it's a male killer or some sort of misogynist male killer who then turns out to be a woman who's fucked up because such and such happened. You know, they love to play with gender in the Giallo. You know, I don't know why it became, well, I do know why, it's because of bros, but it became seen as this very male misogynistic film genre. It's not that at all. And I know we talked about this recently on something else. You know, the final girl of the Giallo, it gets to do kink and gets to go to the black mass, and you know, there's none of that Puritan, you have to give up sex.
No, I love that. I love that. Yes, kink is also a huge theme in these films. I mean, I guess that's actually one of the things that distinguishes the Gothic Gialli for me from maybe the more procedural Giallo films is, of course, they all play with sadomasochism on some level. That's like in the fabric of the Giallo. But I feel like the Gothic Gialli, like, just bring it even more to the forefront. The Whip and the Body is not, it's not a Giallo film. Maybe it is. But
I wouldn't say it's a Giallo film, but it's a widely misread film by like mainstream. I've seen so many guys sort of go, you know, this is about the little woman who is beaten and abused by the big strong man Christopher Lee, and it's like, no, it's about a woman's fuck fantasy.
Exactly.
You know,
that's what I
like,
that's what I love about that film.
Pleasure.
Yes.
It is incredible. And that is the guy who then went on and made that very feminine Giallo. That was the Gastaldi. He worked with Polselli. Polselli was always really queer and strange about female sexuality. So there was some interesting stuff coming into the Giallo. Sadism as well. I mean, if you look at something like, the night Evelyn came out from the grave. Is it out of the grave? Or I can never know which one it is. But it starts with a woman being whipped. I mean, they turned it into a whole art form. They just reveled in the excess of sadism as art. Bava has it all the way through his films, not just Blood and Black Lace, but, you know, he did The Whip and the Body, but even his Peplum films, like his remake of The Viking, Eric the Viking, is it? You've got people on sort of rope bondage on poles in that and a big ritual. It's like, you know, they just love the excess of it, I think. And you see it so much in the Gothic Giallo, this elaborate kink. And I think that's why those have always been more interesting to me, because, you know, I do love things like Bit with the Crystal Plumage has got its own kink mind. Not to give anything away, but
it does, yeah.
You know, killer that like stabbing women up the fanny is, you know, a bit of a thing. I was thinking that knife shot, like
yes, I know exactly the shot you're talking about.
Go in.
Yes, I mean, what do you feel like? What role does sadomasochism play in these films and in the Gothic more generally?
I think with the Giallo, it's always about power, isn't it? It's often used. It's like power dynamics and manipulation and gaslighting. And there's a lot in the female side of the Giallo, or even the Gothic side of the Giallo, that's all about manipulating people's mind. Like, good example is Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, where you have the husband in that who is a domestic abuser, but he's also a sadist. And, you know, he loves to revel in sadism. He's really cruel to his wife. And you just covered that one, so we can talk a little bit about it. So I'm not going to give a spoiler away. And the twist is she's got Ivan Razumov on the side, and also that wonderful cat. But it's Satan, with that, it's all about Satan. He's wonderful. But with that, it's got the Edgar Allan Poe, and there's so much sadism in Poe and madness in Poe. And it's got that, but it's also got this talk of domestic violence, because this guy really is a fucking shit. Like, you really cannot stand him, but then his wife isn't very nice. And then Edwidge comes in, and they're all trying to knock Edwidge off. The whole thing is insane.
They're kind of all horrible except for Brenda, the maid. Everyone is horrible except for Brenda.
Poor Brenda.
I know.
Poor Brenda. But it's all about manipulation, like mind manipulation. It's all about, there's so much about the mind rather than the sex. Well, obviously they loved the sex as well, because it got people into cinemas. But there was this, like you said, the psychosexual. And I don't think you can do the psychosexual without sadism. There has to be someone being sadistic to someone else, or it doesn't work outside of the innocence where Deborah Carr's just doing it to herself, just falling apart. But that's kind of rare. Repulsion, I guess, is another good example. But but mainly it's people being pushed to the edge, and it's about extremity. So they bring all of that in. I love Forbidden Photos, The Lady Above Suspicion, where she's forced into having like kinky sex with old Simon Andrew, who I love, who plays the shitty husband in Blood Spattered Bride as well. He seems like a lovely guy in interviews, but he's such a good shit on screen, and then takes photos of it. And like tries to sort of capitalize on her shame in this weird gaslighting plot. And the whole thing is just like, wow, this is like, yeah.
Gaslighting is a huge theme in these films.
They love it, don't they?
Of course goes back to Gaslight, right? The famous noir. That's it. In my when we watch these films, a lot of the patrons like to play bingo, and on the bingo there's always gaslighting because it's a huge theme. And I think because that's such a scary thing for women, and something that women have been historically subjected to, that it comes out in these films. I mean, the term itself comes from a noir, but maybe a noir that's focused on a female character at the center.
Yeah, and it's not being believed, isn't it? And I think a lot of those early Gothic films really spoke about domestic terror and I know you've been in abusive relationships, and so have I. And a lot of women have experienced this because, just by our nature, we don't have as much power in society. We're not believed. And so to see that I guess it is something that really, resonates with me, especially Gaslight, the original. I prefer the Ingrid Bergman one to the British one's good as well, but I like the Bergman one because it's just Bergman. And you just think, if they could do this to Bergman, they could do this to anyone, because you usually think she's so strong and then she's there really confused. And it's that whole thing, isn't it, about losing your agency, losing your mind, but nobody believing you, and then you not believing yourself. I think a lot of women, we tend to internalize stuff and turn it back in and think, is it me? Is it me? Did I get that wrong? And it's terrifying to see that in a film. That really, that scares me. A guy going around stabbing women up the Joy Trail is fun, but there's not a lot of depth to it to me. A very sort of psychosexual woman feeling like she's losing her mind, that resonates with me because, I think we've all had times where we felt like we didn't have a voice, we weren't believed, or something was going on and we couldn't quite trust our own perception of it, because as women we're socialized not to trust our own perceptions. It's always, did you get it wrong? And there's also the aspect of emotions as well. Seeing women get very emotional, I find that cathartic, because there's that whole thing of we shouldn't ever get emotional, because emotional women are not justified, they're hysterical. And you see, quote unquote, hysterical women on screen that are tearing things up, and you think you go. And I know that's what Kayla really registered with Kayla when she wrote House of the Psychotic Women, how a lot of these films, she saw her own rage, her own anger in them, like this internalized anger. And so there's a lot more to them to me than the more crime ones. I do enjoy them and they're fun, but they don't have the same depth of the female ones. So they don't. I like the ones where it's all about that. It's some of my favourites. Perfume of the Lady in Black, incredible film. And I won't say, it's so, and I'm just obsessed with it and I just keep coming back to it. Why? And I think it is because it's this whole thing of a woman not knowing if she can trust herself, and then she's had this terrible trauma and this horrible stuff in the past. And I know, I do have problems with people just using trauma instead of character, but this isn't it. These films actually had depth. Now it's just like casual trauma. We'll give everybody a bit of trauma instead of a personality.
Well, trauma is like something that's really, really hot in the discourse right now. I mean, speaking of gaslighting, I'm thinking of a film like Amok from Silvio Amato, where the gothic horror of that one is just that this couple are playing mind games with our heroine, and that's the whole thing. That's the horror of it.
It's disturbing. It's the same with Orgasmo with Carol Baker, and just this idea that these people could play with someone and confuse them. It's like really nasty, and that I don't know, that affects me much more than just a kind of body count by numbers thing. I adore Blood and Black Lace because it is incredible and it looks very gothic and it's so colourful, and I've got ADHD, so I love colourful things. I'm like shiny or nice costumes. I won't lie, I'm not deep thinking about everything. I'm normally like, woo, look,
Yeah,
that's why I started watching the women's films. They got beautiful costumes, they're all shiny.
Exactly.
But the actual crime plot in that one isn't that interesting. It's not that compelling. The killer's interesting, but beyond that, it's like a big ensemble thing where they're investigating this thing. The murders in that are quite sadistic, but it doesn't have that element that we're talking about. It doesn't really have the gaslighting. It doesn't have these more intimate. I've seen them described as chamber gialli as well, which I think is a good. I can't remember who said that, but I saw somebody call them chamber gialli, which I thought was an interesting one. So they often tend to be much more around the home, Israel, or the family, or these little smaller casts. They're more intimate.
The horror of the nuclear family.
Yeah, which is the Gothic is all about how hideous families are, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all like you're going to get some curse or, develop some awful genetic thing that makes you monstrous, or there's incest or abuse or domestic violence, or, you fall in love with a guy and he proposes and then you find his mad wife is hidden up in the attic. It's all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so to bring the family in, I guess that's another, which I hadn't thought about, so I'm saying it now, but yeah, I guess Gothic families are very much prominent in the Gothic Giallo. Your Vice, to go back to Your Vice, it all takes place in a little villa, well, not a little villa, big villa, but around a married couple and the people that they know and the cousin that comes in. Yeah. It was like barely anyone else there.
I mean, even something like the Red Queen strikes 7 times, like that entire thing is about the family and the inheritance.
About the sisters and the curse.
Right.
And, oh my God, I love that one.
I love that one too. And I'm reading right now the Alexandra Heller Nicholas book, The Giallo Canvas, which you're quoted in a bunch. And
am I?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Sorry, Alex, if she listens. I haven't had time. She's
especially about the
She's
Gothic.
Wonderful.
Because
it's something I write about a lot. When you asked me to do this, I thought it is something I write. Not that I'm on a mission to do it. It's just I don't know. I wrote about the Giallo so much, and then I started to see. Hang on, this is so connected to Gothic, and obviously Gothic is also an obsession. And it's like, why are not more people speaking about this? Because it's like this weird separation. Oh, well, the Giallo is the Giallo and the Gothic is the Gothic. No, they blur into each other and they followed on from one another. Like, you had the big Gothic cycle in Italy, and then by the mid-60s, when things like Kill Baby Kill were coming out, so still peak Italian Gothic, they start making the first Gialli films. So, there's not that much of a separation. So it just became a thing that I just started to look at and thought, this is really interesting. I love how this is connected to the Gothic. And why is it connected to the Gothic?
Right. I mean, something like A White Dress for Mariale from Romano Scavolini, that is one of those films that kind of exemplifies how you can't really separate all of these genres, because that one, the Giallo kind of procedural element of it is kind of second to everything else that's going on, but it's obviously there. But, you know, that film blends like the Gothic and avant-garde theater and the
Yeah.
Giallo. You know, that one to me kind of represents how these, and the Gothic, just also straight up Gothic horror. I mean, there's just extended scenes of people creeping around a cobweb basement with a
Exactly.
storm going.
And how many Giallo do that, where the woman comes downstairs in a nightgown and the lights are gone off, or it's like dim, or there's some, and it is totally out of Gothic horror. And I think that's a lot of the art of the Giallo is connected to the sort of Baroque excess of Gothic. It's just been modernized a lot of the time, but it is about excess, and Gothic has always been about excess. So I love it. It's like a genre of excess. I am an excessive person.
Right, of course.
I
Yeah,
don't
you're in
like
good company.
Minimal,
Yeah.
stripped down. I want bold, excessive things, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about also about how the Giallo generally is influenced by these pulp novel covers. Well, then the Gothic Giallo is influenced by all of those pulp covers of the women running away from a castle
Yeah.
in the middle of the night.
And they look so gorgeous as well. Everything looks so gorgeous. And there are moments like Tragic Ceremony. I mean, would you call that a Giallo? I'd call that a Giallo.
I would too,
Or The
yeah.
House with Laughing Windows. Or moments in Pensione Para, which are clearly inspired by talking to Bava, Kill Baby Kill. You know, where you've got old Mimsy Farmer coming down this spiral staircase with this little girl at the bottom of the staircase, and it's, you know, dark, and she's scared, and she's clinging onto the wall. And it is totally, absolutely referencing Gothic horror, but then just so happens to have like a strange sort of mystery plot, maybe murder around it. And the ending to that is fucking nuts. It's just insane. House with Laughing Windows, I've always thought is like proto Clive Barker before Clive Barker. Because
that's
you've
such
got
an
the artist,
interesting
he's like Uncle
comparison.
Frank, where
Yes.
he's driven with his occult stuff because he's an absolute depraved libertine to like push himself to the edge. And that ranting, he reminds me of, well, obviously there was no Uncle Frank then, but but there are elements of Barker in that one, and Barker's weird sort of Gothic horror. I did see somebody say that is not a Giallo recently, and I just
Oh, come on.
yeah, it's like, how is that not a Giallo? Guy goes to a little community and he's fixing his painting, and weird shit happens, and he has to solve the mystery, and people disappear. How is that not a Giallo?
How is that much different than something like Deep Red?
Yeah, like how is it not a Giallo? Because it's got references to the occult. I don't understand, but it does have that really depraved sort of not even the libertines, more like decadent. It's more like a decadent thing. You know, this guy is so drowned in his own sin, in his own madness, that he's just, you know, and they got that tape of him that ranting, which I find really creepy.
It
And the
is. I
Mad
mean, there's so
Sisters.
many good like creeps in these movies, just whispering their little rants. I mean, that's one of my favorite things. Is like when the killer gets on the phone or like leaves a message. Just the creepiest voice. I was rewatching Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and the killer has a really fucking creepy voice in that one. But in The House with the Laughing Windows, I mean, speaking of queer, the whole thing revolves around that mural of Saint Sebastian, which is
I
queer
went
saint.
to the IMDb page for that recently because I was looking up a cast member or something, because I mentioned it in my screen piece, which is the third piece, which was all the outliers, so I just finished that. And there is a guy in the comments, and I don't know if this is legit, but he says he was the model for that painting.
What?
And I want to
talk to
contact
him.
him. I want to know. Like, you need to tell me about this.
You can't just drop that.
There's a guy on the comments. It was like the first comment on there, and he's like, I was the model for the San Sebastian. And it's so homoerotic, that painting. It's so gorgeous as well. And just everything about that film. I love the way that the Gothic Giallo use elements of the uncanny as well. And House with Laughing Windows is such an uncanny film. It's almost like Jamesian in a way. This like outsider guy, expert. I know he's not a scientist in this, but he's like a renovation expert. So he's quite logical, and he's drawn into this weird superstitious village where they whisper about this painting, and it has the uncanny, and I think that's also something you see in a lot in the whether it's actually superstitious, supernatural or not. It's that feeling of the uncanny, not being safe. You see it in Perfume of the Lady in Black. It's in all over you see it in parts of Marielle and Tragic Ceremony. The way they use the uncanny is amazing, because the uncanny in its like purest form is to do with the familiar, isn't it? It's the familiar being perverse. And so they take the familiar, the home, or, you know, a family friend that you might know, or
there's
something,
off.
And they twist it.
Yeah, which is so scary
wrong about it.
Yeah, when something you're
scary,
so familiar with is fucked up and off. And I mean, speaking of paintings, because paintings play a huge role in the uncanny in these films, and in the Alexandra Heller Nicholas book, she talks a lot about these films using paintings as a point of horror and the uncanny, and being very heavily influenced by Hitchcock films like Vertigo, or even an Otto Preminger film like Laura. You know, the paintings.
Which again, we're like, well, Vertigo sort of goes into, that's like the tail end of that sort of Gothic era, which I fucking love Vertigo. But it is
too.
that
I mean,
more
it's brilliant.
It's a beautiful film, but Laura even more, because that's one of the films that really straddles the Gothic mystery and melodrama, and then the noir. And those paintings that they use, the one in Red Queen is fucking incredible. It has a big painting at the beginning.
Crazy, yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's like, how did they do this? They had these like tiny little budgets. They'd have this incredible art made.
And the
just
Red
for
Queen,
the film,
too, is so interesting, because there's the contrast between this Baroque portrait and then the modern abstract art in her apartment. And it's like...
Barbara Boucher is like the fashion photographer, isn't she, in that?
Yes.
And she goes into a like fashion world, and then she goes back to the weird castle. And that's totally Gothic, that clash between the... People always think like Gothic is Victorian. No, when Gothic was written, it was contemporary. We just made it Victorian.
Yes, that's such a good point. Yeah, it's Victorian because that's when it was written.
and so you can have, like, you know, if you look at the other sort of offshoots of Gothic, like American Gothic, people like Stephen King writing the Gothic, but in the now, because the Gothic can be now. Those
Southern Gothic, William Faulkner.
Southern Gothic, totally relevant. And it's only the cinematic thing that they're like, oh, the Gothic, we'll just we'll put a castle in. It's like, no, that's where the times they lived in. But they were like addressing the anxieties of their time. Post-Enlightenment, science was coming along, and everywhere was industrialized. The class system had changed. Domestic roles were changing. You know, it was all about anxiety, wasn't it? You know, you had queer writers who couldn't...
the past and now.
Yeah, and that tension, that clash, and it's always a key part of the Gothic, is that like clash between, you know, tradition and modernity. Like, goes back to the Castle of Otranto, this idea of a curse that can follow a family around. It's an old thing that you can't get rid of. And so they do use that in Red Queen really well, because they just physically have the clash between, like, it's not subtle, but I love it. Because it makes you feel really like it's dizzying as a film, because visually, and I'm so visual, you know, the colours, and she's got that gorgeous apartment, and she's out on fashion suits, and they got the Nikolai score as well, that ding ding ding. She's there with a little camera like the fashion girl, and then you got the creepy castle with this painting.
It's just a feast.
Isn't it? It just makes you feel dizzy in this person in a red cape running around stabbing people. So good. And some of the murders in that are great as well. Our Women in the Back of the Van's good. I like that one.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate not being heard, isn't it? That's the ultimate like being ignored.
Yeah, and like I know you were gonna say something about queer writers. I mean, they pioneered the Gothic genre. Mary Shelley.
Yeah, because they were writing things that they couldn't say, they couldn't talk about. So it's all over the Gothic.
I mean,
Which
Oscar
I love.
Wilde wrote one of the first Gothics ever, with Portrait of Dorian Gray, which has been used over and over and over again. And I really strongly feel that the Portrait of Dorian Gray is why the painting as a theme comes up in these films over and over again.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think Dorian Gray is the painting, isn't it? I'm trying to think, there's no painting in Carmilla, is there? But it became such a big part of like that sort of classic Gothic as well.
Right.
The
Vampire
Vincent
Lovers.
Price ones
Yeah.
use paintings a lot. But yeah, I think it does come from Dorian Gray. And look at Oscar Wilde when he spoke out. So people had to use the Gothic, and there were women writing about, like the Bronte sisters, just writing about society, writing about women. There was all this stuff going on that no one could actually say, which is why it makes me laugh when people just think, again, I say people, film bros. We should just have film bros. It's not people. People are perfectly capable of making these distinctions.
It's the establishment.
Yeah, but they are the establishment, I guess, aren't they, in some respect? But
Well, they're being toppled, but they're not going out without a fight.
They don't like it.
Yeah.
They think the Gothic is like, the Wolfman or Frankenstein, and it's like they have literally no understanding of what the Gothic is or how queer or how feminine it is. And you often get it with the Hammer guys. They're like why are all these women coming in? Where is this? It's like, do you think this ever belonged to you? Just toddle along now. Like, just fuck off. It's never belonged to you in the first place. It was never yours.
Oh my God. There's been like so many insufferable men commenting on the Queer for Fear documentary
I can imagine.
And
I can just imagine. It's like, why are they watching it? They hate watch. I love it when they hate watch.
They hate watch
or
it.
hate listen.
Yeah, I mean, Shudder. First of all, Shudder, get rid of your comments section. I can't handle it. It's just all of these men in the comments like, this Mary Shelley, we don't know for sure if she was actually queer, and you should just stick to the facts. And I'm like, first of all, she literally wrote about how she used to have sex with women, and I like, what are you talking about? Like, what more evidence do you need? Or like Bram Stoker, we don't know that he was actually queer. Like, okay, what about all of his love letters to Walt Whitman? Like, what do you guys think that was? It's just so funny to me. I was reading an essay about Amok, and the writer refers to the main character's lover as her friend. Like,
oh my God.
I
Can
know.
you just imagine being that shouted and not...
They literally have multiple sex scenes. So
oh my God.
I mean, then, yeah, I'm also thinking of this question of like, lesbianism is very present in these films, and a lot of people would, kind of chalk it up to like this male gaze thing. And I think, of course, like, that's partly there, obviously, like, but nothing is ever just one thing. And I guess I was wondering what you feel like the role of these queer female experiences and characters are in these Gothic Gialli.
That's an interesting question. I mean, obviously there is the like commercial thing, isn't there?
Right. Men like to go watch it. Yeah.
The het lesbian thing,
yeah,
that they like. But they don't like it to ever be too much. And I do find with their classic fans that they tend to stay away from the Italian stuff or Jazz Franco because they find it too much. It crosses some sort of weird line that they've got, and I'm not quite sure where that is. But anything I think that gets too involved in women's pleasure for themselves is that line. And to me, I just find it really powerful. I mean, why do we like horror? Why did we get into horror? To me, because horror was where all the women were when I was growing up. And, you know, the queer women and the weird women and the mad women. And the, you know, the flip side of that was Hollywood coming out with films like Pretty Woman and all that. Well, that was a bit later on, actually. I was in my teens then. But, you know, the Hollywood woman, I saw nothing offered by that. And yet I saw someone like Ingrid Pitt in Twins of Evil, very powerful. Like, that was very powerful. I was like, I want to be this woman. You know, I don't want to just be with her. I want to be her. Look at her. She's so, you know, were Hammer expecting young bi-curious girls to be turned by that? Probably not. But like you said,
doesn't mean that they weren't.
Yeah. I mean, once that gaze is given away, you're not, the audience are not passive. You make of it what you will. And I think that just the savage sort of femininity that you find within the giallo, but also the way that it deals with sexuality as being very fluid in the giallo. I feel like that's one place that sexuality is more fluid than most other genres, like compared to the slasher. I know they've made like queer slashers later on, but the core slashers were just very... And I love the slasher, but I find them fascinating because they got that weird American Puritanism, which we don't have in Europe. Yeah. And I just find that fascinating as an outsider. But that weird, like, don't have sex, don't, you know, and then when they do have sex, it's the jock boyfriend with his can of beer. And it's all very that. Whereas in the giallo, it's mature women with sexual agency sort of floating along. They might sleep with their friend downstairs. They might be married, you know, but then they go off to a black mass or whatever, fuck a couple of people, some guy with sharp fingernails, the woman
all
next
the colors
door,
of the
and
dark.
None of it means, none of it means anything.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh yeah, that just happens. No one's going like,
it's just excess.
Oh, you terrible slut. And I think that to me is there's like zero slut shaming really in the giallo. Women have very complex sexual personas, and that often includes the fact that they're bisexual or at least bi-curious in some way. There's no dividing line put there. No one ever seems to comment on it. It's not punished in any way. And that, to me, was really important because, you know, being slut-shamed is one of the main crosses we still have to bear. And yet you see a genre, and it happens a lot in horror film, unfortunately.
Absolutely. But I mean, you're saying, the slasher like took the giallo and kind of like sucks the transgression out of it. And
it's like you.
I love slashers, but it's like very, you know, we're gonna take that and then we're gonna take the perviness out of it. And not just like, the killer is a perv.
Yeah, it's like a strange genre, and I find it fascinating because it is like there's so much fear in there about American suburban lives and stuff. I just find it great, and I grew up. That was like my first after Hammer. My coming of age was during the slashers period, so of course I fucking love them. But then I found Eurocult, and I was like, "What is this?" You know,
I had a very similar trajectory.
You know, like, oh my god, it's like someone opened the door to, like, I don't know, Alice in Wonderland or something.
Yeah.
And in terms of like queer representation, I wasn't seeing that anywhere. I wasn't seeing women who slept with men and women. I wrote about this for my Patreon ages ago. I think it was about the Company of Wolves, which is not really about bisexual people, but like as a kid and growing up, there wasn't even that word. I didn't even know that word. I didn't even hear it until the 90s when a friend of mine came out, and I'm like, well, that's okay then, you know. So I could see it in certain films, and of course I was attracted to them. I didn't quite know what they were because nobody was talking about it, but it was like, okay, this is here. I think that is important. I think it is important. And how many queer fans the giallo have? There's loads of them.
Loads.
You think if you go to Letterboxd, it's like 50 straight guys over 50. But in all the time I've written about the giallo, I found that fans of the giallo are like all the wonderful weirdos, underground weirdos, really.
Yes. And what's
You
the
know?
best part about us is we're obsessed. We bring the sex back to it, and also the appreciation of the aesthetics. Like, queer people love to talk about the outfits in these movies. Like,
Yeah,
and
what is wrong with that? Why can't you talk about the outfits?
I mean,
It's
they
just
clearly spent a lot of time picking them out to make the
it's
film.
like, yeah, they are part of the Giallo. You can't
Yes.
separate them.
Yes.
This whole fantasy idea of outside of the Gothic, cosmopolitan Europe. Joseph Dwyer wrote for us at Diabolique. He wrote this article which I love called like Gialloville. How this place Gialloville, it doesn't really exist, but everyone's like jet setting and they're all really well dressed, and it's a total it's a fashion fantasy.
Yes.
And when those films came out, men and women were watching them. They wanted to be like Barbara Boucher, wouldn't?
Right.
They had appeal to both sexes. And obviously there was a huge domestic market in Italy and everybody went to the cinema. It wasn't just... So that whole the Giallo is just a masculine thing. It's for men. It's men's films. That's more like a British and American thing. It's like that's not
totally
what they
agree.
were to the Italians. They were like cool, beautiful films with beautiful music and beautiful costumes that were also a bit scary. Same with the melodramas. They were all about costume, all about sex. Some of the sets in Rebecca even now. I just sit there drooling like Homer Simpson face because like every shot in that film is just
Rebecca.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's
Oh
just
my God. Love Rebecca so much. Yeah. I mean, all of these, like, there's so much attention to details that are considered feminine in these Gothics.
And why should that be just feminine? Why can't everyone appreciate that? It's funny that all these film dudes love 2001, which I feel like is one of the most boring, excruciatingly boring films ever made.
So boring.
And it looks amazing, but no shade on Stanley Kubrick, but it's like, this is what you give a very obsessed, neurodiverse person lots of money, and he's very fascinated at looking at that space console, but we aren't, because it's like, Stan, you need to step back. But the amount of guys who will say, oh, well, it looks amazing because it's space things, and it's like, fuck off. But we can't say Rebecca looks amazing, or the Red Queen Kill 7 Times looks amazing, because that's like not real cinema talk. But you can sit there and dribble over that one scene I remember where they've got the dinner on, little space dinner on a plate. It's, oh, it's so amazing. You can say that because it's a space scene and it's man things, or, dribble over the sets of fucking Star Wars or whatever. They build little shrines to the Death Star
It's
or
all
whatever.
the same shit. It's all the same thing.
Little models and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I made this little model of this spaceship. So that's okay. That's like legit sort of set decor and costumes, but stick someone in a nice dress, in a ball gown, in a house with a big painting. No, that's not real cinema. But there's always been that. I always joke that it's only now that Douglas Sirk has been on Criterion that all of a sudden all these more highbrow people are like, oh yeah, melodrama, yeah, we love Sirk, we love melodrama. It's like, because generally the more highbrow types say, hey, any form of emotion in film, unless it's male, unless it's violence. And violence is a great performance, that's acting. But anything that's quote unquote feminine is histrionics. It's not pure cinema.
The hysterical woman.
Yeah, the hysterical. Oh, that's just over the top. It's quote unquote soapy. It's,
like when people were laughing at Isabella and Johnny's performance in Possession.
Exactly.
And now it's
like,
heralded as an amazing performance.
yeah, because we're allowed to now because it's like, some hipsters saw it in New York and they've risen it up.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, oh yeah, we don't laugh at it anymore. But there is that as well. And I think that's why a lot of the more feminine sort of Gothic Giallo get pushed out. Oh, they're too over the top. They're too, we don't like the hysterical women. That's not quote unquote proper acting. And they make so many weird arbitrary divisions between things. It's like, but yet you herald westerns where men run around shooting people, but because that's acting, that's an emotion, that's anger,
right?
But that's okay because it's cool. Oh, look at Quentin Tarantino, excellent examples, still nominated for Oscars. Makes a film about that basically ends with 10 minutes of a woman getting her face kicked in, and then burnt with a flamethrower. But that's art. Any woman crying or freaking out, oh my God, no, that's terrible. That's like soap opera. Like, where do these come from? These like bizarre, maybe it's they're scared to admit they like dresses and crying. I don't know. This toxic masculinity, it ruins everything.
It's true. I mean, it's true. But that's, I think, why people like you and I come back to the Gothic Gialli over and over again, because of the attention to all of those things. And it's men making them, like they, it's really men making these movies.
Exactly. And they made them. And it's like, so there's this weird, like, we need to detach these men from what they were doing. And it's like, I found this old interview with Terence Fisher a few years ago where he talks about the fantastique and the Gothic and the fairy tale. And I felt vindicated, man, because the way they talk about him and Hammer, it's like, oh, he's just this guy coming in. He wasn't invested in this. It's like, you don't make films that look that amazing if you don't have some creative investment.
The time that goes into making a film? Of course you have to have some level of investment in it.
Like, oh no, they're like totally detached from it. Or these guys, make the Giallo. Oh yeah, they were just totally detached. No, they weren't totally detached.
A lot of these men also were radicals, like left wing. Yeah,
there was that as well.
Like the writers of White Dress for Mariale or Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, Pittoro. He was a huge leftist that made experimental, like surrealist films. Same thing with Romano Scavallini. Like he was a leftist. Like these guys were radicals making these films and injecting the sensibility into it. Yeah.
There was a huge shift, especially around 69, 70, where they still had a lot of funding for films over there, but they could be really experimental. And even like mainstream Giallo films like A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, which also has elements of the Gothic Giallo. It's all about memory and trauma. And repressed sexuality. And, and the brilliant
so queer.
Florinda Balkan, who was queer, lived with a female producer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Didn't you know that? Oh my God, she is the flexer. She was with this producer for about 2 decades. I think she was a baroness, and so her roles, she was very, very, very specific over her roles, and that's why she tends to be in the more art Giallo things, because she had so much agency. She's like, hey, my missus is like the baroness, so and so
that's
she
so
often played very queer characters. But yeah, she's queer, Florinda, and I just love her in all the Giallo, in Footprints on the Moon. She's just such an interesting presence. But she was totally invested in the quote unquote art, which is why she took. I think but then she did things like Flavia, which is like a fucking feminist diatribe, anti-religious diatribe. She was great. Yeah, she's queer as fuck. And she was one of the only ones. She was actually out as well. Like, it was well known. A lot of the others weren't. Edward, she was just quite conventional, Edward. She was with Luciano Martino for 10 years. But yeah, Florinda was the fucking best. But even like in a film like that, Fulci was a lot older than those guys. And, you know, he was more of a journeyman, but he was also an artist. And he makes Lizard and Woman's Skin, which is like an amazing experimental Giallo film that looks
I love
at
that movie
sort
so
of
much.
memory. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a, you know, even though the lesbianism kind of, you know, gets men in the seats at these movies, there is also like a sensitivity to it. Like in a film like Lizard in a Woman's Skin, you know, that's her interior experience, you know, it's not completely on display for men. Or something like Amok, where this woman is the heroine and she's going to find out what happened to her lover to save her potentially, or you know, it's very kind of, or in a White Dress for Mariale, when the character of Semi, who's a black woman, is being beaten by her white husband. Her moment of reprieve is the moment when she has lesbian sex. So there is, you know, these guys, like, they position lesbian sex as like way better in some ways than the heterosexual sex happening. It's like a reprieve for the women who are being beaten and exploited by these horrible men.
Yeah, and even like if you look at the female vampire genre, Blood Spattered Bride is all about a woman being saved from domestic sort of violence by a lesbian lover. I think they were scared, but I think they're like, you're right, there's more to it. Argento, for one, he did have sort of caricatured characters in some of his films, but there was a lot more to it with Argento and sexuality. And if you look at Tenebrae, you've got the lesbian couple in that, who become victims, but they're not just there as victims, because before that you just see them as this everyday boring couple having an argument. They're not having hot sex. They're just in this house rowing about something and just presented as normal, like without comment.
Right.
So it pops up so much in the Giallo. And the way that gender is played with and the way that sexuality is played with. I mean, there's so much sex in the Giallo, obviously, you can't get away with it. But often, you know, I like Forbidden Photos, A Lady Above Suspicion. She got Dagmar Lysander and Susan Scott in that one, Nevis Navarro. And they're not really having a relationship, but Susan Scott is, for some reason, I can't remember why, has got a massive collection of porn photos. And she's always like trying to show them to the other one, to Dagmar Lysander. But the whole end of the film, this isn't a spoiler, but it's them going off in a convertible to probably look at a porn collection. And I like to think they've gone off together.
Of course.
And it's that whole thing. It's like, why has Susan Scott got all these porn pictures? And she's always like...
So funny.
It's so transgressive.
Extremely transgressive. And like you said, of course, like part of this is men's fear of lesbians, right? Like that's also there. But again, I never feel like anything is always one thing. Like I feel like there is that anxiety there. And then at the same time, there's also like, yeah, this is a reprieve from misogyny.
Yeah, there's a lot of freedom for women within the Giallo in that respect. And sexuality overall, and even in certain male characters as well that are more ambiguous. But it's more like a woman thing, I guess, because it was more acceptable. It was more,
There's
I guess,
some
commercially acceptable.
Eyes Behind the Wall.
I'm trying to think.
Eyes Behind the Wall has queer men in it. And there's
even
also
that character in, like you said, Laughing Windows, there's a bit of a queerness.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. And then, of course, like Hatchet for the Honeymoon, or
I just love that guy, so triggered by weddings.
That guy cracks me up. His
so
monologues.
Good.
And his ghost wife, who's
the
berating
ghost wife
him,
is amazing.
The actress who's in all the Pasolini films, she's great.
Yeah, I'm trying. I always blank on her name. What's her fucking name?
I'm like
great.
blanking on her name because of long COVID, but I was just talking about her. I'm just looking her up.
She is so good.
Laura Betty.
Laura Betty. Yes. She is so good in that. I like the bit when they're in the back of the ambulance and she's kind of just like, I'm not going anywhere, fuck face.
She's like, this is your hell. I'm here forever. And she says actually that she was really instrumental with Mario Bava in developing that character to be like a more fully fleshed out presence in the film. But that kind of like, it's obviously, that movie is very obviously inspired by Psycho, and that is like a queer, landmark horror film. So there's, of course, like with the men, it's not as present because it's not as commercial and acceptable. It's not going to get like straight men in the seats to go watch it, but it's definitely present. There's so much sexual tension between men in these films.
Well, if you look at something like Tenebrae, you've got the whole idea of a trans actress in the role of the, not to give too much away, but of a flashback of a very resentful guy who is humiliated and he's in love with this girl. And again, just presented as a normal, everyday thing. I think Argento, just to redeem myself on Argento, because it sounds like I'm bad. But I think he did a lot more. There's a lot more queer stuff in his films than he's given credit for.
I agree, yeah.
You've also got the very androgynous character in Deep Red, the boyfriend, the boyfriend
who might be a trans woman.
Yeah, he's played by, what's her name, from Hanno Cambiata Faccia. I can't remember her name now. She blanking on her name. What's her fucking name? She's got her eyebrows shaved off in that. But it's like, presented as a young boy. This guy has young male lovers, but could possibly be a trans. I think Argento did that a lot. It's without giving spoilers away, but there's a lot of that in his Giallo films. Beyond the kind of masculine, or it's like usually the masculine detective or whatever who is thrown into the mystery. The people around them are always very like queer and ambiguous, and he just didn't ever make it like a bit. He didn't do the sort of I'm going to make this into a whole plot like someone like Sergio would do. But it's there and often just presented without comment as if it's no big deal. Yeah. And I love that about his films. And Tenebrae is just such a subversive film, but, again, it goes straight over the film bros. You're like, there's so much going on in this. And they're just like, oh, a nice slash man. Yeah, she gets her arm cut off.
And there's, especially in the Argento films, there's always like this, it's ambient queerness, like you said. Like it's always...
I like that, ambient queerness. Yeah. It is.
And it's to add to... and of course it's to add to the transgression and the horror elements of things being very like topsy-turvy and confusing. But there is also like this very everyday sort of element to it. Like it's both. It's Gialloville, like you were saying. Like there's... Yeah,
where everyone is kind of on the sort of fluid. They're sexually fluid and anyone could sort of, go to bed with anyone. It really does have that quality to it. Even the Argento films, I think. I love that ambient queer. It totally is. There's queer everywhere in Argento, but I love the straight guys don't pick up on it.
Of course they don't.
They're like, these are a man's films. It's like, if you looked at these films, there's
these men were leftist going on here. They were hanging out with queer people. They know about queerness. Like
exactly. If you look at the scene back then, and you had these like Laura Betty, for example, worked with like Pasolini, worked with like massive auteurs, Florinda Balkan, another huge art figure, like all these people. Vanessa Redgrave is out there, and all these filmmakers. A lot of them are leftists, and they're hanging out with artists, and we're right in the end of counterculture. And it's like these people were smoking fucking weed. They were all having sex. They were all into high art and fuck knows what else, and they were making these films. Like they would totally disagree with your anti-woke stance on this.
They
like,
absolutely
no,
would.
this
These
it's
men
like, these were,
identified
like,
as feminists. They identify
I know.
as feminists. Like, they're, you know, very, and of course, hanging out and working with queer people who are also working on the film, you know, as cast and crew. So it's very present, and that's why I use the term ambient queerness, because even if it's not explicitly about that, it's always present. I don't want to keep you too much longer because I know you said
No, it's all right. No, it's half. You were an hour early, so.
Oh,
I've
really?
still got a bit of
Okay,
time.
gosh.
Yeah, it's only 9:45.
Oh, I thought that. Yeah, I thought.
No, we originally were going to meet at 8, and then you said 9:15. And then I thought, oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
We've got time.
I'm sorry. I get really confused with the time difference.
Oh, that's right. I love this ambient queerness, though. I just.
Yeah, and we haven't even really touched on disability in these films too. I feel like disability is a huge part of the Gothic, like the mad woman or the kind of pervert deviant in the wheelchair. I mean, something like Eyes Behind the Wall, where the man is wheelchair bound and he's watching through the peephole, this able-bodied man fuck all these other people. Yeah, there's so many like transgressive identities flowing in and out through one another in these films, and I just love it.
I think that was at the heart of Gothic, though, wasn't it? It was all about outsiders. It was all about the outsiders, and even that idea of being monstrous. You would fight. How many of us got into horror not because, you know, we wanted to be the hero, but because we identified with the monsters.
Of
we
course.
wanted to be the monster. From the age of 6, I wanted to be a vampire. I was really pissed off when I found out that wasn't actually a thing. It was like, you know, because that's where I felt I belonged, in the night. You know, and you get to go and do all this cool stuff. Oh, it doesn't matter if you have to kill people. That's totally fine. But we're all attracted to that monstrosity, I think, as outsiders, because those are our tribe, our people, you know. And a lot of the people writing Gothic were writing it because they had to express it in some way. And so I think that's why you always get in Gothic that idea of being majestic in ruin, the idea of the Gothic anti-hero, the sort of vampires. You know, they're the ones that are attractive, not if you look at the Italian Gothic, you know, the heroes around, and they're fucking boring. It's like, who are these people? You know, it could be someone like Mark Damon. Just totally ignore them. It's just all about, you know. And the British Gothic did it slightly differently because they had people like Peter Cushing who would sort of, you know, as Van Helsing. But the Italians never bothered. They would just put cardboard people in the good roles.
It's like a complete afterthought.
It's the same in the Giallo as well. It's like you get these, you know, well-meaning cops or whatever who turn up. It's just like, yeah, okay, that's the cop. But they're rarely interesting. They're rarely interesting unless they're flawed themselves, or unless they're part of it themselves, or they're going mad themselves. But, you know, mainly it's all about the villains, or these people that are going crazy, these people that are having like nervous breakdowns. They're the interesting ones. And so it is a genre for outsiders, I think. I don't know what like neurotypical, completely normal, if that even exists, what they get.
I'm skeptical that it even exists, but people tell me it does.
Does it exist? Yeah, I'm just saying, does it actually exist?
I don't know anyone like that. But,
neurotypical, 100% straight, 100% everything, whatever, normal person. Does that exist? I don't know. I guess film bros say that it exists. They're just obsessed with the killings, I guess. That would be a very boring way to watch these films, though, wouldn't it? If you just fast forward.
I can't really imagine. I mean, you know,
although one of my exes watched those zombie films, the Italian zombies, and they would just fast forward them, all the cannibal ones, to, oh, look at this good gore. That was a bad time in my place, a bad time in my life. It's like,
Oh
what are
God,
you doing?
people who fast forward movies, come on.
Yeah,
What-
let's have a look at the gore. It's all
What
about
good
the
is the
gore.
gore
Maybe
without
there's
all the
that.
context around the gore? I don't
Yeah,
get that.
you do get those sites. There's an old one, and it used to like you'd get like the Giallo killings. They just talk about the way people were killed. What a boring. I can't sort of relate to that.
No, oh my God,
can't
not at
relate
all.
to
The
that in
killings are
any
like
way.
sort of secondary to me, kind of especially in the Gothic Giallo, like with all the atmosphere. Like there's really brutal killings. Like the Red Queen has really brutal murders, but
Yeah.
it's kind of what's fascinating about them is like the way that they take place in this like surreal, sort of psychedelic, artsy
Exactly.
context. Yeah.
There's so many Giallo films where I'm like, I want that house, I want those
yeah.
clothes, I want that car. Like I got a whole list. The Spasmo house by the sea, that big house in Tenebrae, I'd really like that one. It was totally all about that. But to miss all that because you're just looking at someone being decapitated, to me, that's like the least interesting thing about the Giallo. I mean, some of the deaths, okay, you think, that's interesting what they did there. But mainly, no, that's not what's interesting about, that like something like A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, for example, where you got the stabbing of Anita Strindberg. It's like, okay, yeah, that looks really realistic, but what's really interesting about this film is Florinda Balkan and what the fuck's going on with Florinda Balkan.
Totally.
Like, that's what I'm interested in.
Something like All the Colors of the Dark, where the murder stuff is like completely secondary to everything else going on.
Yeah, which I think was Sergio. His whole thing was, okay, we want to do the Carol Baker ones, but Argento has done these more violent ones. So we'll just put some violence in, but we'll carry on doing the Carol Baker ones, which is what he does. Like, All the Colours of the Dark is one of the most Gothic Giallos ever made. It's even set in London. You've even got like the park, the churchyard and the park from the Omen, which would appear in the Omen a couple of years later on, turn up as locations, and it's like foggy London streets, and this poor woman Jane who's very confused, influenced loads by Rosemary's Baby.
Totally.
So yeah, Sergio wasn't even looking at Argento when he made that. Really, he was trying to do his own thing. Obviously they needed more violence in them because that was one of the sells, I guess. But it wasn't the only thing about those films. It never was. And I feel like the Argento bros, that is all there is to them. I've heard
They're just not very
don't want to
smart.
be mean to people, but I've heard some commentaries on stuff, and I'm like, I was flicking through one recently on Quiet Place in the Country, which is an early. I mean, that kind of falls into Gothic Giallo, I guess. Elio Petri, and you got Franco Nero as this painter. He goes off to the country and he gets obsessed with this idea that this girl who died in this villa is haunting him. And Vanessa Redgrave is his partner. Starts off with Nero tied up in bondage, having a dream about his missus sort of emasculating him. Petri was more interested in all his films were like criticisms on the system, on the right, on capitalism, on the government, on, and that one is like a huge criticism of capitalism's hold over art. And, it's got this very brutal ending that has this very anti-capitalist message. I'm listening to bits of this commentary. I was taking screen grabs from my article, but I was like, not that I'm bitter, but I pitched for that one and was
well, I'm bitter on your behalf.
Yeah, and so I thought I'll just see what and I'm just hearing somebody very confused by what they're seeing and not really understanding it, and at one point even saying this isn't really a Giallo. No, it's a fucking Giallo. It's a total Giallo. How is it not a Giallo? It's like the female Gothic Giallos, but you've just got Franco Nero in there as the Gothic maid. And I love it when they do that. I love it when they gender swap them.
Yeah.
And they put a man in there who's like really confused and ghastly.
Do you feel like House with the Laughing Windows is like that?
Yeah, totally, because he's gaslit and he is like vulnerable and everyone and
That's
he
queer
gets
to
people
me.
telling him. Yeah, see, I love it. And
Being
Nero
put in the
is like
position of the female
yeah.
melodrama. That's incredibly queer.
There's a few films that do that, and I love it when they do that because it takes away the edge, like the more masculine sort of, the Sam Dalmas, Crystal Plumage type. He's like the go-getter. I'm going to sort this out. I am the able, capable man. I can solve this mystery, and they just feminize them. It's just amazing, and they have people tell, no, that's not what you saw. They have people like like the guy in Laughing Windows. It's like everyone else is in on it. I love that. And he can't trust anyone. And you're thinking, is his girlfriend in on it? And it is totally a twist on that. Totally a twist on the feminine Gothic. Franco Nero is that in Quiet Place. There's a few others. I'm trying to think which other ones do it.
Well,
but
I'm also kind of thinking about how film noir, like the femme fatale that is what people think of when they think of film noir, but that's actually a very small subset of film noir. Like a lot of the noirs are very like masculine procedurals, but people really fixate on the femme fatale, like this beautiful, dangerous woman who completely cucks the male protagonist, and that is brought into these giallo and specifically into the Gothic gialli. This man being sort of like in Laughing Windows, like being cucked and gaslit by everyone
I guess
around
that's
him.
their worst fear, though, isn't it? To be demasculinized.
Yeah, or emasculated, I guess, is the word.
Emasculated, that's it. And being tied up, Franco Nero in bondage. This is like Django, for fuck's sake. And he's there in his little pants, tied up by this woman. I think it's wonderful. I think it's really wonderful. It is like the Gothic ones use a lot of the Bluebeard framework, and they do in the noir, and they do in the Gothic melodrama.
Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave is very Bluebeard.
Yeah, and you think of Bluebeard as like a parable for warning to young women: don't ever be too curious, don't look in the wrong door. And so it's like, in a way, they are punished like women are punished. And I love that. It's like, if you get too curious, you are gonna, be the one that becomes the victim, which is rare. Like you said, mainly it is to do with this more noirish. Again, that's Argento, though. He used a lot from Hitchcock. He used a lot from the noir. And it was very much to do with this outsider maverick male who stumbles across he's in the wrong place at the wrong time, just spots something. And then it's his mind that is able to, figure this thing out. And he's like the maverick detective type.
Right.
And that wasn't an Argento thing. That came from the noir. It came from Hitchcock. That whole being in the wrong place at the wrong time is in all over Hitchcock, but then it's in Mario Bava's The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which was an ode to Hitchcock.
Yes.
The first quote-unquote official giallo. And it carries on from there. But I don't understand why people just think that's all there is. It's like, there are literally hundreds of these films, and if you watch them, they range from completely out batshit nuts supernatural, like something like The Killer Reserve 9 Seas, which I just did a commentary for. It was on a little box set that Arrow did, and there was a guy on the Facebook page lecturing everyone on how that film was not a giallo, and it's a fucking giallo. It's Agatha Christie.
Get a life.
Little Indians being picked off one by one. It just so happens to have like Gothic in it,
right.
And it just so happens to have notes of the supernatural. And so it ranges from that to then something very crime sort of procedural like Solange, which crosses over into crime thriller. You can't really, or something like Sergio Martino's Suspicious Death of a Minor, where you can't really tell, is this a crime thriller or is this a giallo? So it goes two ways. And everything in between, like all the different colours, a lot of which are Gothic, but there is this resistance to accept them. I feel that's changing more, like Vinegar Syndrome doing those Forgotten Giallo sets and stuff. You're seeing like more of the weird stuff come out now, which is good. And people seem more accepting of, oh, okay, I'll take it. I'll take this. Whereas 5 years ago, it would have been like, there was a bit of a kind of resistance to it.
Yeah, I mean, also what's funny to me is like the people who were making these were not like, I am making a Giallo film, and this is
No, they didn't even know what a fucking Giallo was at the time. It was just like a thing.
They were like, yeah, and I like this, and I like this, and this guy did this, and let's put some Hitchcock in there, and yeah, it's not. That's not that how people make art. They're not. Periods and things are usually assigned after the fact, unless we're talking about like, the Fluxus movement or futurists like who named themselves. But a lot of people get caught up in these labels when the people working under those conditions did not use those labels themselves. So
no, it was just a very organic movement, I think. And if you look at, it's interesting because if you look at something like So Sweet, So Perverse, you had Claude Chabrol in France at almost the same time, making films like Les Biches, which are very similar, but that's not really a Giallo. It was just something that was in the air. Sexy thrillers. Cinema was becoming more permissive, and everything was about fashion and this idea of a cosmopolitan Europe. And of course that's going to register in films. People were capturing the mood, the time and the excitement of it, and then films like Blow Up come along and they become really influential. And that's not really a Giallo, although it has certain conventions you could call a Giallo. So, but it wasn't made as a Giallo, it was made as a fucking art film. So there was so much cross-pollination, and a lot of like Ernesto Gastaldi came out of the Gothic. So of course he's going to write what he knows and what he's interested in. And so that finds its way into the Giallo because everyone's hiring him because he was such a prolific, fast and great scriptwriter. So we get Ernesto. And so, of course, it's all going to be mixing. He's then inspired by fucking Midnight Lace and Doris Day. And nobody's going, we have to make this. They're just like, hey, it's thrillers now. Let's do thrillers. And, let's do some Gothic. Let's do some weird. They're all like trying to outdo each other in a way as well to can get the weirdest, I think. Totally. I always sense that there was like that bit of competition going on there. I don't think anyone else, they didn't seem to like Argento. And I love watching Argento interview because he's so mad. He thinks he invented everything. It's great. and he's just kind of like, they all stole my titles. And it's like, dude, they were all making Giallo before you. But he's kind of, you get these little, and a lot of them are gone now, bless them, but you'd get these little passive aggressive digs or whatever. And it was that, wasn't it? It was like just this a whole period in cinema, to me, overall, all of Eurocult, all of that era of horror, of Giallo, is like this tiny pocket, like you said, very connected to the left, very connected to art, avant-garde, and it's everywhere. It's in the vampire film, it's in the Giallo. A lot of it has got so much underlying political stuff as well. Why are rich people always getting killed in the Giallo? It's like, let's kill the aristocracy, the fucking wankers. It was all that. And it's such an exciting period of film that shuts down by about 75. It's such a tiny little window where you can feel that people actually felt free in cinema for the first time ever. A lot of the actresses, when they're asked about nudity, they're like, I did it because it was such a liberating thing to do and we could do it. When I interviewed Danielle Wime from Daughters of Darkness, she was like, I was young. It was suddenly we were able to do this. And I just thought, great, I'm going to do it. It felt liberating. And you feel it in all of those films, especially the female-centric ones. And then it's gone. Then it's totally gone. I don't think we'd ever get that back again unless we had some, fuck knows what, some minor revolution or something. It's just that little pocket from, say, 68 to about 75. And then suddenly it all becomes very cynical again. And then the slasher comes along. And the slasher's quite a cynical genre, even though it's fun. It's cynical, isn't it?
Truly, but at least we get the erotic thrillers of the 90s.
Oh, yeah, and they were like...
that's kind of a
they were
return to
whole
the
other
Giallo,
thing.
honestly.
Yeah, Martino made a couple of really good ones in that period. Craving Desire's a good one. Smile of the Fox, he did a couple of sleazy ones.
Ooh, I haven't seen those. I gotta see those.
Yeah, they're really fun. I wish someone would just release them properly. It's like, with him, it's like, we just release his Giallo films, but he made like so many other films. He made hundreds of, well, not hundreds, but loads of sex comedies and action films and crime thrillers and all sorts of stuff, and everyone's just like, we'll just keep re-releasing his same 5 Giallo films. We'll just keep upgrading those. It's like, where's Craving Desire? Is it Craving Desire is the one that's got, what's her name in it? Mrs. Klaus Kinski. What is her name?
Klaus
so
Kinski.
Blanking her name. Deborah Capraglia? She's also in Tinto Brass's adaptation of Fanny Hill, Paprika, which is one of my favourite Tinto Brass films. And she's like the femme fatale in that. But it is very Giallo-esque, and there's like weird hints of supernatural in that. Even in the erotic thriller, they were being weird. The Italians just didn't give a shit, did they?
No, they're completely sexually deranged. I mean, there's also like this whole pocket of Italian dramas or sex comedies that completely hinge around incest, like that movie The Dark Side of Love with the brother and the sister.
They love it. Or the weird like sort of coming of age dramas, or but even within the sex comedy, people don't give enough credit to that. The reason I'm obsessed with Italian sex comedy is most of it was a criticism on traditional gender roles, on Catholicism. The man was always emasculated and ridiculous.
Somebody,
and the family.
Somebody in my Discord called the nuclear family, a torture chamber. It is
so, and they were totally looking at that and hypocrisy and how men would often try and get away with stuff, but it would always be like the emasculated, cuckolded man who ended up looking ridiculous. And they were so much more subversive than people ever give them credit for. Same with the Giallo. They're like, no, there's no politics in here. It's like, no, there's totally so many politics in here. There's gender politics. There's a they're having a go at the system. They're criticizing. The cops are always shit in Giallo. Why?
I love that. You cannot rely on the police in a Giallo film.
Can't trust them.
That's what it's like in real life, and I love that.
Yeah, or they're in on it, or they're trying to hide some like corruption at the top. And their teenage prostitution rings or whatever. And by the time we get to 75 and the crime thriller comes out, that's even more angry. That's even more violent than the Giallo, and it's totally political. It's totally like, fuck these cops, fuck these priests, fuck the, they are totally going for it. And it's the same fucking filmmakers. But you do get these guys who are kind of like, I don't do politics. So why are you watching this film? Even Westerns in Italy, some of them are so really homoerotic and political.
I don't do politics. That's the films are very political, and like I said, they're made by really political people who were often started out making avant-garde experimental films that were banned by censors. I want to say the writer of The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, Pitoru, had made a film about a flood that had happened where people were really disadvantaged and kind of abandoned by the government, and that was really, he fought to get that out of censorship. And a lot of these people turn to genre films so that they could make crazy, weird stuff.
Because that is why do we love genre? I was talking to someone about this the other day, and this notion where you have grown adults saying, I didn't enjoy this horror film because it wasn't scary. I think once you get past the age of 20 odd, you're not going to be fucking scared by a horror film. Occasionally something might be like, I saw Ring when I was about 23 when that came out, and that unsettled me. But it's rare. You're not going to get really scared. Why do we like horror? Because it's grotesque, because it's all the sadism, the grotesquerie, things that are revolting, things that are really excessive. You know, it's fascinating, and it's the creativity in that. There's creativity in genre that you don't generally see in other genres that are more formulaic. There's so much creativity there. I want to go into a film that's like the Wild West. Anything can happen here. I know I'm almost guaranteed that with an Italian giallo or Italian crime. It's like, where are we going here? You never know where you're fucking going with those things. You can never second guess them. And so that's why we're attracted to them. And I just don't understand people that then watch those films and just say, oh, that's not scary or whatever, or I like the kills. It's like, you're missing out on all the meat of the film, which is this wild fucking creativity that was not given space anywhere else. So what a filmmaker's going to do? They're going to go and make weird fantasy films. So that's what they are, really, weird fantasy films a lot of the time.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, that's part of what I love about the Gothic Gialli in particular is the playing with the line between fear and arousal. And that's a huge part of it. You know, I always think of that Tracy Emin art piece. That's just a neon sign that says, my cunt is wet with fear. And that is the Gothic Giallo. Like, there's a sex scene, and then in something like A White Dress for Mariale, the sex scene is being literally intercut with a horrific murder at the same time. Like, a lot of these films, like, people are fucking and then it just cuts to somebody being stabbed horribly. Like the penetration of the sex is completely is analogous to the penetration of the murder. Like, it's just, it's tied together. It's you can't parse it apart. People are sex and death, sex and the death drive. It's very Georges Bataille, if you will.
Oh, there's so much Bataille. There's so much of the weirdness that you get in that sort of literary pornography as well, and the decadence of it all. And, you know, these were people making film. They understood this stuff. And especially given that, I think, because Italy, first of all, it was under fascism, and then it was a deeply, entrenched in Catholicism. You often get that when people are repressed to that level. It's like, this was a catharsis to them. And the country was slowly changing, so it was a catharsis to them. All the fucking weirdness comes out. There is always a political element to Italian film and sex and Spanish film and sex. Look at how, people often write off Jess Franco as, oh, he just made these sleazy films. But that was an actual political act as somebody who came from Franco's Spain.
Yes.
There's a whole political level to that you cannot extract the two things. He wasn't just making sleazy. It was the point that, he couldn't physically do that in his own country. It made him a pioneer. It wasn't just this, oh, he was just making sleazy films. I don't think you can take that context away. There was so much going on in Italy around 1970. So much in the political landscape. They were just about to start the years of lead. You got anarchists blowing people up on the street. You've got thug cops shooting people. You've got divorce suddenly becomes illegal. Like, all of this stuff. Feminism suddenly erupts in Italy. They didn't even get their own red light cinema till the end of the 70s, because that early period is where they're waking up. But if you look at the stuff that Joe D'Amato made for the American market, for example, in the early 70s, And he made stuff like Emmanuel in America, where you got a woman wanking off a horse.
I fucking
His
love that
Italian
movie.
stuff is fucking great, isn't it? But in America, you could see deep throats, so it was like no big deal. But in Italy, it was still, even though these films are kind of wild, there was still a lot of censorship. There was still a lot of religious guilt. There was still a lot of, political stuff. And so, of course, people are going to use that that's why I love Spanish film from that period as well. So fucking transgressive, because people can't say what they really want to say, so they go to genre.
Yeah.
Get Vicente Aranda making Blood Spattered Bride. You get Eloy de la Iglesias, a gay man in Franco's Spain, making some of the most glorious fucking genre films around that time. And that could get you killed, being gay in Franco's Spain. People would just disappear. Your neighbor would just disappear. And they were doing it. So, it wasn't quite that in Italy. There was more of a commercial thing. But there was so much of the political that came into the Giallo.
Yes.
And so much of that kind of freewheeling counterculture art movement.
Mixing of the high and the low, right? Like that's
and that too, which is what I
essence of the
appreciate, because
Giallo.
I hate making that distinction. I hate that we as film critics try and make that distinction, because for me there is no separation. There's just cinema. If it's interesting, it's cinema. And the Italians, I guess the French did it to a certain extent, but it was really Italy that were pioneers in this. They had such a core industry that were working with Fellini, people working with Fellini and Bertolucci and all the sort of high-end auteurs.
Yeah,
and
but they would be in a Fellini film, and then they would go be in a James Franco film.
And there was no separation.
Yeah.
I guess because there's no Hollywood, so it was more of an actor's scene, wasn't it? It was more of an actor's scene. It was more of a director's scene. They didn't really have the quote-unquote star system set up or anything like that. But then you had all these sort of Americans or British people going into Italy. Like Barbara Steele tried Hollywood for 10 minutes and she's like, fuck this. Goes to Italy, she's like, I've found my home. Carol Baker gets blacklisted by MGM. She's running away from an abusive husband. She's had 2 nervous breakdowns in Hollywood. Goes over to Italy for a holiday, meets Marco Ferrari, doesn't come back for decades, says it was the best time of her life. Because she was free and she was respected as an actress and they loved her there. They're like, Carol Baker. Whereas Hollywood were like, you wouldn't do this thing, so fuck you. We're not going to let you act. And so it was this amazing atmosphere to have been there at the time. Hobnobbing and hanging around with all those people. I think if I had a time machine and could go anywhere, it would be there. It would be like Italy, 1969 or something.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, like you're saying, you get all these actresses, and a lot of these women were really subversive figures. Like, think of somebody like Jean Seberg, who's an American who goes on to be in these Godard and Truffaut movies.
Yeah.
She was a leftist. She was mentally ill. These are transgressive outsider artists making these things. So
yeah, exactly. There were so many people that were coming into the industry from that, or coming in from experimental theatre, or people that worked with auteurs but then also worked. The one figure I really love is Jean-Louis Trintignant, who worked with high-end auteurs and was, gold star French talent, but then also turns up in weird shit like Death Laid an Egg and shit, and these weird Giallo films, so sweet, so perverse. And it's like, this guy is incredible. He's like an amazing talent. And he's doing that, and he's doing, all this sort of working with all the French auteurs and the Italian auteurs. He goes on to do The Conformist, and he would just do anything, and everything he did was perverse. He wasn't in anything Gothic though, but I love him. he always had a sense of perversity in the giallo that he did.
You also get somebody like Klaus Kinski, who's like,
yeah,
a horrible,
Klaus.
horrible person, but he's like straddling all of these genres. Like he's in these Werner Herzog films. He's in like the Gothic Giallo, like Death Smiles on a Murderer.
I can't believe we haven't brought that one up. I
Yeah.
mean, that is total, isn't it? Like weird. Like what even is that? Mad doctors and zombies
That movie is
and
insane. Yeah, that movie is
and
completely
Eva
insane.
Rolling going around and incest.
Yes.
And, even like a weird nod to Carmilla with the carriage breaking down and like, oh no, I just need to stay for a while. But then it's a bizarre revenge plot. But Klaus would just turn up
just randomly, just
Slaughter Hotel.
Slaughter
Isn't
Hotel,
that?
yes, exactly. Which is kind of a gothic. I mean, you've got this like sort of
medieval,
killing
in
sprawling
it. I'd say it was gothic.
asylum.
It was, the mad women. All the women are supposed to be mad in it, including Rosalba.
They're nymphomaniacs. Yes, yeah. There's all these figures that are in these like higher brow, quote unquote, films, and then in these lower brow genre films, but the distinction was just it wasn't the same at the time. So it
was just creativity. It was just this pocket. I think that's the saddest thing about the Italian industry, that by the early 80s it had all really closed down, and even people working in pure genre were having to shift into TV, shift into other genres because the money wasn't there. But in that little key period, there was a lot of investment in Italy. You could get films made quite easily there. There were a lot of these like weird financial figures there, hanging around, smoking bongs with all these actresses, handing out money because everyone wanted to invest because it was cheap. It was really cheap to make film out there. So a lot of directors could get their films made with minimal interference. It was like, as long as it's, we'll make it like a sexy thriller, but they could do whatever they wanted. And there's guys handing out cash. There's, money they can get from the arts grants to fund them. And then it's all gone by the 80s. And so it really closes down at that point because it was all about Hollywood, and even the slasher, as much as we love the slasher, but even the slasher kind of put it out of business because the Americans were like, well, we're making our own cheap sort of slasher films now. We don't really need the giallo anymore because we can do them ourselves and we can do them even cheaper. So, the end finish, but for that little period, you can feel it in those films. I just feel, in every single one of them, there's that feeling of excitement, I think. That this is new and it's exciting and it is subversive, and they were deliberately trying to press people's buttons. They were deliberately trying to set fire to the fucking establishment.
I fucking love it. I mean, what do you think of all of the mannequins that are in these movies? Like, what do you...
Oh, I love the mannequins. So obviously there's the element of the uncanny, isn't there, that comes into that. And I always find mannequins quite creepy.
They're so scary.
Dolls.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything
There's a lot of dolls and mannequins in Gothic Giallo and in Giallo generally.
And oil paintings, like very realistic oil paintings, freak me out as well. I don't like going in old galleries where it's just portraits. I get the vibe. And they use that a lot, but there is a film called Mannequin in Red, which is a Swedish film, and I can't remember the director, but it's like a Swedish krimi. And if you watch that, you can see that Bava was definitely influenced for it, for Blood and Black Lace. And obviously Blood and Black Lace sat around a fashion house, brings all these mannequins in, and then he uses all that amazing lighting and stuff. But you find Mannequin in Red, which actually has mannequin in the title, I think you can trace it back to there, even though it's not a giallo. It's like more like a krimi. It's this husband and wife detective team, but they've got these like fashion murders, and there's scenes in that you're like, fucking Mario Bava saw this film. and then he made Blood and Black Lace, because there's scenes that are almost replicated in it. But then he put his own like very over the top Gothic Baroque twist on it, even though it's supposed to be modern. And you've got the fashion house, that's still a very Gothic film. So Gothic. The whole like villa itself where the fashion moguls live is like some weird villa in the middle of nowhere. One of the opening scenes where there's a woman coming up the driveway in the middle of a storm was obviously influenced by the Spiral Staircase by Siodmak from the 40s. And so Bava's bringing in all this Gothic stuff to the Giallo. A beautiful film though. But yeah, I think with me, mannequins, I love how they're used in Hatchet for the Honeymoon as well, because that one has got like supernatural things to it.
Yes, I love the mannequins in that movie. It's just creepy and uncanny. Yeah, and I mean, speaking of the erotic thriller, you get somebody like Karen Arthur, very transgressive female director who did the Mafu Cage, which is like an American Gothic,
like,
honestly,
or bigger.
Yeah, or Legacy, which is also a very Gothic film.
Oh,
and
it's so good.
I love that movie. And then she made an erotic thriller, Lady Beware,
which I haven't seen that one. I haven't seen that one.
You should definitely.
I have to see that one.
Definitely watch it. I mean, they butchered it. They butchered her vision, and she's kind of like she's always been very upset about that. But it for what's there is very interesting, and you can see where she would have gone with it if she had freedom. And there's so many mannequins, and mannequins as a theme through these noir, and then through the Gothic Giallo and Giallo generally, and then even into something like the erotic thriller. You can kind of see how their use is like a through line between all of these genres, like the way that,
or even something like Maniac, which is a slasher, but then you've got elements of that which are like Gothic fantasy with these fucking mannequins.
With the mannequins talking to him.
Yeah, which is like, that is so creepy. I just find that I when I was a kid, I used to just get really freaked out by dolls or little clowns. Had the clown thing, anything that was too kind of, I was always hiding dolls or removing them from my room and saying they were talking. I used to say weird shit like that when I was a kid.
I mean, dolls are very scary to me.
Whispering too much.
Yeah, it's the uncanny, right? Like we were saying, like it's human but not, and especially with mannequins when they're like human sized. Yeah,
it's not quite right. There's something like really off about it, and I think that's why Blood and Black Lace is so good. The way that he uses the fashion house and all those elements of the mannequins and the mannequins' bodies and their hands and stuff, and he turns that into a Gothic haunted house in a thriller, and he uses that as the thing to be scared of. Is so remarkable, such a remarkable thing. I'm trying to think, Spasmo, they got a really, don't want to give spoilers in case people, but Spasmo's got an interesting use of mannequins. There's a killer in that sexually defiles mannequins. It's kind of a fun twist on it. Puts them in lingerie and does
proto Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah, total Jeffrey Dahmer though, isn't it? I was watching that Dahmer show and he's like, you're stealing the fucking mannequin.
I know, it reminded me of a Giallo, honestly. I was like, this weird sexual mannequin thing, which he actually did do in real life. Like he did steal a mannequin. So it's just
which is wild, isn't it?
It's a corpse. We didn't even talk about necrophilia, because that's also a huge part of the Gothic Giallo. The mannequin, I feel like, yes, it's uncanny like a doll, but there's something else going on there because it relates to necrophilia. It's like the corpse, the inert, beautiful thing.
They just didn't hold back on necrophilia in Italian Gothic either. Which
Beyond what is that? Beyond the Darkness, Joe D'Amato.
Beyond the Darkness is one of my favorite Gothic films.
Joe D'Amato is a
world.
Fucking crazy person. He
makes some of
the craziest stuff.
Beyond the Darkness is just fucking, to go back to your point about, the killing in the people having sex. There's that scene in that. I don't know if it's when he's having sex or he's having dinner, but it keeps like intersecting with them like boiling this fucking body up, and it makes you want to throw up. And it's like, ugh. Yeah, I love D'Amato. He was insane. He was absolutely insane. That was like a kind of remake from The Evil Eye, though, which is early 60s, very much tamer gothic. And then you had Hitchcock. I mean, they just love the fucking necrophilia, the sadism. And this was in the fucking 60s when they were still heavily censored. And yet, ironically, their films would get even more cut when they went to America, which always makes me laugh. Because America was supposed to be like land of the free. I guess you had the Hays Code.
We have such a weird contradictions here.
Yeah, Catholic censors, and they'd be like, right, okay, you got to cut all that out, but that's fine. You can have Dr. Hitchcock and his kinky sex game, that's absolutely fine. Or, Christopher Lee whipping the woman, that's fine. Goes to America, they're like, get right, all of this has to come out. It's got to go. It just cracks me up. Because it's like, hang on, they're supposed to be the repressed ones.
Yeah, but we had hardcore pornography at the same time that all of these movies are getting cut. And we're, pioneering hardcore pornography, which is illegal in many of these places. So it's such a strange contradiction.
I find it fascinating as an outsider, I have to say. I mean, Britain has its own censorship, but it just... the whole kind of religious thing that goes around it and the justifications that are made. Like you said, well, in a country where, hardcore porn, you could go to a cinema to see it. And, all this stuff's happening there. And yet there's still this sort of weird attitude to horror that it somehow has to...
Well, what's really cool about horror in the U.S. is that a lot of the people involved in it were also involved in pornography. So, like somebody like Alfred Soule, who did Alice, Sweet Alice, his first film was an adult film that got him excommunicated from the Catholic Church. So it's, that's horror, and porn is so present in Euro horror, and it's also very present in American horror, but in a different way because of the level of censorship and the legacy of the Hays Code, and how those things are just been kept very, very separate. So horror, kind of blends what is supposed to be segregated, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah, I love that period, the early 70s into the 70s of America, where it becomes... the Hays Code goes out in 68, and then there's just this bizarre outpouring of madness for about 10 years, and you get films like The Matthew Cage.
Yes!
Weird films with Andrew Prine in them, and just all this like weird shit going on. And it's like, that to me is like one of the most exciting periods in American horror. Because again, it's like bizarre stuff like The Baby. It's I just did a trailer commentary on
which is
stuff,
gothic.
Yeah, which is
The
totally
Baby
like
is totally gothic.
They're making that, and then Last House on the Left, and all this stuff is coming out. But then you've got like these sort of Andy Milligan. It's just like, I love it, and it all just, as soon as 68 goes, the gate opens and all the weirdos come out. I just fucking love it. And they're like, hey, I'm just going to make this like weird art horror film, with fuck knows what. The Mavi woman fucking a monk. I said that to somebody and they were like, I never thought she was fucking the monkey.
She's fucking the monkey.
That wasn't just me, was it? I was questioning
Are you
myself.
crazy? Of course she's fucking the monkey.
That wasn't just me. It's like the monkey in Sunset Boulevard with old fucking what's her name?
It is a direct reference to Sunset Boulevard.
They're taking that monkey out, and she's been fucking the fucking monkey. He's the new monkey. Somebody accused me of being weird for saying she's fucking the monkey in the Matthew Cage.
I thought we all were we all knew that she was fucking the monkey.
That's what I thought. I thought we accepted she's fucking the monkey.
Yeah.
or the orangutan or whatever. It's not even a monkey, is it? It's an orangutan or the orangutan.
Wait, what is?
She's fucking
What is that
them.
movie? What is that movie? Is it Helen Mirren is fucking a monkey?
No, Max Monomore with Charlotte Rampling moves.
It's Charlotte Rampling, yes.
In with her fucking husband, who is Emil from Vampire Circus, but he doesn't look Anthony Corlin or Corliss, and he's so sexy in Vampire Circus, and then he's just like this weird beige businessman, in 80s attire. He thinks she's having an affair, and he walks in on her, and she's in bed with a fucking chimp, so she moves the chimp in. I love that film. It's so fucking nuts. It's like a whole scene with it. Everybody knows she's... Oh my god. I'm glad it's not just me with a Matthew Cage though, because I was accused of weirdness on that. Some guy was like, I've watched loads of that. I never saw that. I'm like,
well, that
it's
person's
there.
wrong.
Then I was thinking, is it not there? Did I invent
We
it?
watched
Did I
it
just
with my.
imagine?
I watched it with my patrons, and we were all like, yeah, she's fucking that monkey.
She had to be. She was.
That was her
the
boyfriend.
Her Mahfouz. She's also fucking her sister.
Yes. Yes. Do people not think she's fucking her sister?
Well, we didn't get to the sister because this guy was so freaked out that I suggested she was fucking... So I did like an essay on it. I did that and Max Monomore. And I was like, hey, I've written this like essay about ape sex. And this guy starts going, I didn't think that's what she was doing. And I'm like,
he's
no,
wrong.
She's totally fucking... Then I was like, have I just written a whole essay on something I imagined? I got really paranoid about it.
That's so funny.
And then I was like, no, I'm looking it up online. Matthew Cage. To see if other people think that. And I was like, did I imagine that? No, I'm just so glad I'm in good company.
Of course, yeah. That movie, you know, like I said, direct reference to Sunset Boulevard, which is, again, a noir, which is swathed in the Gothic. I mean, all of this stuff, like, that's... You know, that's such an American Gothic film, like the crumbling Hollywood mansion. Like, that kind of speaks to what you were talking about, how, yes, the Gothics are set in the Victorian because they were writing during that period.
Yeah.
Whereas the contemporary Gothics are set in something like a crumbling Hollywood mansion. Or in the Gothic Gialli, it's a crumbling Italian villa, but it's set in present day 1970s.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
and
tension.
It's just perfect. It doesn't... I mean, there are obviously Gothic Giallo that do the period thing, but there are also Gothic Giallo like So Sweet, So Perverse or Orgasmo that are totally set in the late 60s or early 70s. They've got nothing of the sort of traditional costume Gothic about them. But when you look at them, you think this is Bluebeard... This is Gothic melodrama, it's Gothic mystery, it's gaslighting, it is madness, it's all of these things that are totally Gothic. If they're not Gothic, what else are they? And I think Gothic gets left out a lot. People ignore the Gothic, but it's fucking everywhere. It informs like 90% of the horror that we still have now comes from the Gothic.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good note to end on, honestly.
Yeah.
Gothic diffuses horror. It's so present. It invented the genre. You know, it's remember since, you know, the first Georges Méliès movie that had Gothic elements in it, you know, it's that's horror. So Kat, thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thank you.
It's so fun to just like reference all these movies,
yeah,
and, you know, just talk about ape sex and
I love how that comes up in the middle of it. Talk about Gothic Giallo and then it ends up with ape sex. I love that.
But thank you so much for joining me. I know I didn't get you to plug your social media. I forgot to do that, but
I'm not that. Unless you're
I
on
figured
Facebook with
that
the
wasn't
boomer
really-
energy.
yeah,
I am on Twitter, but I don't tweet much. I'm on Patreon as well. You can come and see me
Yes,
there.
go if you enjoyed this episode, you should absolutely sign up for Kat's Patreon. It's one of the Patreons that I subscribe to. It's great. You've got, just your knowledge is just so vast. I learned so much from your Patreon. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes for people. But yeah, thank you for joining me, Kat.
Oh, thank you.